equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child and sibling loss. This is the Hope After Child and Sibling Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you'll hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. I'm Greg Bufkin, your host and one of the co-founders of the Empty Chair Endeavor. To learn more about us, please visit our website at www.emptychairendeavor.com. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Greg Bufkin, your host, and today you'll be hearing a conversation I had recently with Billy and Julie Melton. They're the co-founders of Restoring Hope, which is a ministry to bereaved parents like all of us. We'll talk about their grief journey that started back in 2018 when they lost their beautiful daughter, Juliana, to a brain tumor after a valiant 16-month-long battle at the age of only 27. You'll also hear about how Juliana's faith in Jesus Christ never wavered throughout that long battle until he carried her home to heaven on Valentine's Day of 2018. Billy and Julie also share how their relationships with Jesus brought comfort, peace, and healing to their brokenness and enabling them now to be able to help other grieving parents. And here's my conversation now with Billy and Julie. Well, Billy and Julie, welcome to our podcast. It is really great to have you guys with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having us, Greg. We just really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for your ministry.
Absolutely.
And look forward to having a conversation with you.
Well, thank you. I've been looking forward to it as well. And we'll also be sharing a little later on in the conversation about the ministry that you guys have as well. So I think what I'd like to do right here at the beginning is just to have you guys take a minute or two and share anything personal that you would like to about your family, or if you guys are still working or retired and that sort of thing. So I'll just hand it over to you for, like I said, a couple of minutes.
Okay, Greg, I'm a retired accountant and currently staying busy. We keep our grandson, who's about 15 months, a couple days a week.
Oh, and that'll keep you busy.
Yeah. When he takes a nap, I take a nap. So
I'll bet.
He's active.
And so precious and sweet. So
Of
precious.
Course.
We are blessed to be able to do life, with our daughter that lives here in town and partner with them and, love on their child, our grandchild. So
yeah. And that's probably the cutest and smartest and most cuddly grandchild on the entire planet, right?
That's right. That's right.
He's a day maker.
I was a social worker for a number of decades. I retired as a school social worker a few years ago and have been kind of filling in some there, but also I've been the last couple of years just helping in the faith-based community, just responding to some needs there. And also, just partnering with some different practices in the community. So to use my social work skills and coaching skills. So
that's great. It's so encouraging to see people in this season of life where we all are to find that purpose where you can use those skills and use that experience that you built up all of those years. Now you don't get paid for it necessarily, but you get to lend all of that to helping other people. So I'm glad you guys have found that.
And God's starting to open up more doors for me in my area that I feel passionate about. So that's really cool. Just trusting Him with that. So
yeah, that's really important. And I think when we make ourselves available, God opens those doors, and every time
Amen.
we step through them, we're blessed and somebody else gets blessed in the process. Well, y'all, thank you for sharing that. And, what I'd like for us to do is just kind of dive into your story, because what brought you guys to our podcast as guests is that, like all the rest of us, you guys are grieving parents. You lost your beautiful, sweet daughter, Juliana, back in, it was actually Valentine's Day of 2018, if I remember correctly.
Mhm. That's
To
right,
a,
Greg.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys had told me it was a glioblastoma. I'm not sure.
She had brain cancer. She had a history
Right.
of brain tumors. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, let's go back a little bit, because I would love for you to just to share with our listeners about who Juliana is and with the impact that her life had on you guys, as well as other family members and people that she did life with every day. And I know she was a newlywed, if I recall.
Well, we were talking together about how, again, as we were getting ready for to share with you, and how much our children are so easy to talk about. God blessed us with two beautiful girls, Juliana and Jessica, who both love and follow Jesus. Juliana was actually the first child, the first grandchild, the first everything. I'd say she paved the way for all the grandchildren, and my dad said he was her number one. She set the bar high.
Wow. That's really
Um,
cool. Our daughter
yeah,
Whitney is the same. First everything.
yeah. And so it was fun to raise two daughters together. But Juliana was like, we call her, would say she was like sunshine. She
Oh,
was like a joyful ambassador. She had a contagious laugh, big blue eyes that sparkled. Her sense of humor was she was so fun. She loved large. She had red hair. She loved adventures. She loved people. I say that she was the kind of girl that really lived well, loved well, and taught us how to finish well.
sounds like she was
Um,
one of those people that walked into a room and just lit it up.
Lit it up. That's right. I was going to say she could light up a room. She always excelled in school and was always looking for opportunities to reach out to women that needed encouragement. And so she earned her Girl Scout Gold Award helping underprivileged girls, serving them. She loved to serve. She also served in her youth group. And one of my favorite memories is getting to the opportunity to go on a mission trip with her to Guatemala. It was a family trip, and she was the interpreter.
Wow. So
So
she
she
was
didn't.
fluent in Spanish.
Well, she wouldn't say that at the time. She said she was proficient, but
Proficient.
she could communicate, even well then before she even, finished her started her undergraduate degree in Spanish and
Really.
sociology. But so in Juliana, she loved worship. She was a gifted dancer. She loved deep conversation over coffee. One of her friends told us, you know, that she had the confidence to be herself, which put others at ease. And I mean, that just, as a mother, that just touched my heart,
What an
I mean,
incredible characteristic.
just, she never met a stranger, Greg. She was comfortable in any situation, whether she was speaking to the custodian in Spanish or dedicating the community center, a local community center, which she did during her time. But, our girls have always been my biggest fans, Billy as well, but they would cheering me on. And especially Juliana, she would say, Mama, she called me Java Mama because we love coffee. All of us girls do. she, she'd say, you can do it. You can do it, Java. And she had this term, which, was part of her life verse in Zephaniah 3:17. She would tell me and others, the Lord rejoices over you. And that just, would just touch me so. Yeah.
Well, I know that you guys miss her so much, and it sounds like
Mm,
she just left this big, big hole.
she did. She did.
She did.
Yeah. Yeah.
She loved international students, and when she was in college, she would always be bringing them home on weekends and holidays from Chile and Mexico and Wales and Australia, and
Mm.
she lived in an international dorm on the campus, and she made this big group of friends from all these different cultures. And so then her senior year of college, she decided to go live in Spain the whole year. So
Really?
Yeah, in Toledo, Spain, and she really became fluent then, and, one of our highlights was being able to go visit her there, and she was our tour guide and took us
Oh,
around, and she
man.
she knew all the shopkeepers in this small town in Toledo, and, she would talk to them in Spanish, and their faces would just light up, and
Well, it sounds like she brought an awful lot of richness to y'all's lives. I mean,
She did.
I
She
mean,
really
just the fact
did.
that
Yeah.
you guys got to meet all of these people from all these other cultures and countries through Juliana. I mean, that is so cool. That just doesn't happen every day in every family.
no.
No, no.
Wow.
And
Well,
we got 1 extra year with her because, after she graduated, she lived with us, and she was an interpreter for the school system, and after she finished that year, she decided she wanted to go to graduate school. So she went to Virginia Beach Regent University and got in the government program, and she served as the president of the graduate students and got to speak at a lot of different things and really grew in leadership.
wow. Wow. Well, it sounds like she was a natural born leader. I mean, just from what you guys have described. I mean,
Yeah, thank you, Greg. She was a leader, and she was very a humble leader too. And she met Brian while she was at Regent, future husband, and he was a second-year law
yeah.
student, and after they graduated, they got married and settled in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
And they were
Yeah.
they were married 2.5 years, had beautiful years.
Let me ask you guys this. So, I mean, we all know, everybody who's listening knows, you guys know this. When we lose a child, it doesn't matter whether they're a baby and stillborn or whether they're in grade school or whether they're an adult. It changes our lives in ways that we could never, ever have imagined. And sometimes it just kind of leaves us feeling like, we're stuck in time and the whole world continues to revolve and move forward. And we're just right in this grief spot. And sometimes it's hard to know what to do, how to move forward, how to process it, how to walk it out, because we don't come with an instruction booklet. And those are conversations that we never have either at church or through any other source. We don't come prepared for that. We don't prepare people for that, do we? And so you're left trying to figure out how to navigate it alone. So let's talk a little bit about when you guys lost Juliana. I know that it was a 16-month long battle, and I know she fought really hard. But I know that you guys also knew that it probably was a terminal diagnosis. So in some respects, I would have to guess that you guys were already grieving in some ways. And so when the Lord took her home, how did you guys begin to process that and to figure out how to do daily life again?
Yeah, well, I think if I can back up a little bit,
Yeah.
we, you know, we got a call that nobody really wants to get. Our they a little over a year into into the marriage, she began having headaches,
Okay.
and she went for an MRI, and her husband Brian called us saying that they'd found something concerning, and they were heading to the emergency room at Duke. And at that time, I mean, we began, I remember the ride over. Jessica, our daughter here in town, came over and we gathered some things together, and the ride over, we kind of had a choice to make at that time. Are we gonna we didn't know what the outcome was gonna be. We're gonna trust Jesus through this. So over the next few days, God orchestrated the steps. She was able to have a world-renowned surgeon who did a successful brain surgery, and begin immediately. They began to do the 16-month treatment journey. But personally, I don't know that I really started grieving. I don't know that Billy can maybe speak to that, but we basically just responded to Juliana because she during that time chose life. They
Sure.
they never when they spoke to us at the beginning after the successful journey. They were kind of almost, you know, like she was so young, and they were all looking for different, methods of treatment, and
Right.
they changed her treatment plan several times. So we just knew that she was in God's hands, and he was in control, and she responded to life that she wanted to live life. And
Yeah. So despite the diagnosis, they weren't really, I think what I'm hearing is they weren't really certain about the prognosis. They knew that, I mean, she responded well to the treatment, and it sounds like they continued to be very aggressive in their treatment, and she was fighting hard. So maybe maybe I overthought that, and maybe they were more hopeful, just like Juliana was, that she was going to beat it. Is that fairly accurate?
we didn't really, you want to speak about that, or
Well, I think one of our doctors said there's always hope.
Mhm.
And, we prayed for healing, but God eventually healed her and took her to heaven. And not the
Right.
way we wanted. And, the doctors, they don't, I wish they did know everything about cancer, but they don't. And,
Yeah.
they did their best treatment, and Juliana wanted to use everything available and, fight the fight. But in the end, God made the call to bring her home.
Yeah. And as you said, he did heal her, and
Mhm.
she is now whole, no longer in any kind of pain. She's not suffering in any way, and she gets to hang out with Jesus every day, and we have to wait.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
she chose life and was an inspiration during the process. We really didn't even think about dying. We didn't really talk as much about it as and we don't, that's not, we just, she lived life in the moment anyway. She was living day to day anyway before any of this ever happened.
Right.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We all,
So she
all ought to be ready to go to be with Jesus tomorrow, or I mean, in our next breath.
Well, you're
So, yeah.
absolutely right, and the way that even when we if we get a diagnosis like Juliana got, you guys have mentioned several times that she chose life. She was already choosing life before that, and she was living it a day at a time to the very best of her ability, and that's how God designed us to live it. Some days we're better at doing that, and some days we're not as good. But having that kind of perspective on life, I am sure gave her gave her probably more time than she would have had for somebody who did not have that desire and that will to continue to live on and to live well through that battle.
And, like the thing that we say, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. That was the first step. And again, we we just chose life day to day, because I think it just stumped the doctors sometimes, because they were always changing things. And so we didn't ever focus on that. We just focused on, okay, what's the next step in this process? How can we support Juliana? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
So
we, no matter what the means is of death, you're never, it does alter your lives forever. We're never the same individuals, but we saw Juliana become the individuals that we prayed for her all the years, and we saw her fulfill her calling in Christ. We call her a joyful ambassador. That's what she
I
really
love that.
was. She really wanted to be in life an ambassador in government, because she got her master's in government, and God opened so many opportunities up for her at Regent. So, but now she truly is an ambassador in heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think back to those early days after she went home, I don't know how much experience you guys had with grief at that point. We all lose grandparents, and sometimes, earlier in life, we lose parents and we lose friends. But when we lose a child, even if we're acquainted with grief already, we're never, ever prepared for that level of grief. Talk a little bit about what helped you guys in that early season, particularly the first year, 2 years. I think those are probably the hardest for most people. What were some things that y'all found that helped you begin processing in a healthy way and helped you as you navigated on through that grief journey?
Well, we always say, Greg, that when you love deeply, you grieve deeply, you know.
Absolutely.
And, it was really difficult. Juliana was not only our daughter, but she was our friend. And I'd say the first year with the pain was so intense and raw. I mean, I would cry throughout the day. I didn't even know what wailing and crying out, really, really crying deeply was, until I experienced that. Even out in public, I would start crying. But, that was a healthy emotion for me. And it helped me. It was part of my healing, part of my healing journey. Year 2 for me was even more difficult I think for both of us in some ways.
A lot of people say that.
Reality set in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think the shock level that first year in some ways almost insulates you from what it's like that second year, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, like in the early stages of grief, we'd look at each other and we'd say, this just doesn't seem real. Like we're going to turn around and Juliana's going to walk in the front door and call me, hey, Java Mama, or hey, Mamacita. She had
Yeah.
various endearing nicknames for me. And so it's like the reality set in the second year. How about for you, Billy?
Yeah, Greg, that phrase "stuck in time." I found that interesting because time really seemed to stop or just very dramatically altered for us when she left because friends are moving on with birthdays, holidays, trips, grandchildren, but your time just stops. And it's like it's painful to look at the past and hard to look at the future, and you're left with the present where it's just kind of memories are all you really have to hold on to.
Yeah.
And many of those are painful. And so grief could be very paralyzing for me early on. I'd be at work and some picture, song, or memory would trigger me. And I'll say, God, just help me do the next thing. We read a book by Elizabeth Elliot. She talked about just doing the next thing.
Mhm.
That was really all I could focus on.
Yeah. Those are good words. For you guys, probably in all likelihood, because it is for most couples, that level of grief affects us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. What was the hardest part for you guys?
Well, I mean, grief, I think it's unique, like you said, to each situation and each person,
Right.
Yeah, I think just, you know, knowing we're not going to see her again till go to heaven. But then knowing that's one day closer to when we will see her again.
Right.
Not
Right.
being able to do life with her. Is that what if I'm
Yeah,
understanding your question correctly or?
that's certainly part of it, Julie.
Mhm.
Sometimes, I guess what I was really getting at is that very often the impact of grief shows up in our lives with physical symptoms that sometimes mimic depression. Sometimes people have physical ailments as a result of the stress that comes from the depression or from the grief. And certainly, it affects us spiritually. Sometimes even the people with the strongest faith will talk about how it just felt like it pulled the rug out from under their faith for a while. And sometimes we have to borrow faith from other people that we're close to who are strong in their faith. So it's just it's a multi-pronged attack on us when we go through something so traumatic. And I guess that was kind of what I was getting at.
I think friends and family were so
Mhm.
important to us,
Mhm.
holding us up during that time. I mean, we read books and read the Bible, but there were times where we just needed somebody to hold us up. And
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and we're holistic beings. I would say that every single area of my being was affected. Yeah, and,
Yes, I would have been shocked if you had said anything to the contrary.
yeah, everything I was affected in every way. I mean, one of the things that helped me, I started journaling. That was something that really helped me.
And Billy, I like that you brought up the fact that how other people helped, whether it was family members or
Mm.
friends. Community is just absolutely critical in in our healing journey and being able to cope with what we're trying to process after something like this happens. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's why it's so important for us to have relationships like that in place already. Because when something like that happens, it's hard at that point to try to build that kind of community. You can feel very isolated, very alone, trying to do something that you just have no clue how to do. But when you have those kind of people in your life, man, it makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
And we had that. We had that, and we do now.
Yeah, we had a small group that we'd been together with for probably 20 years and kinda did life together, and our daughter also had a group of young professionals, and it was amazing how they came around us and brought meals and just were there
Oh,
at times where we were low. I mean, we were just
yeah,
low, you know?
And I always
yeah,
say that my mom and dad prayed us through. I think God allowed them to be with us for a number of years more because they prayed us through, my
yeah,
family, our extended family just but they just because all of them loved Juliana too. All of our friends and family loved her. Love her. So, yeah, we couldn't do it without community, it's just
No, I think sometimes people, we're living in a culture now where so many people think that they can just live independently. I don't need other people. I've got my work, I've got this and I've got that. I don't need, a whole bunch of people in my life. And we're not talking about acquaintances, are we? We're talking about people, as Billy referred to, that you guys have been doing life with for a long time. They knew you guys inside out, as it were, and you guys knew them like that. You knew that some of them you could call at 2 o'clock in the morning if you needed to, and they would be there for you. And that's when you discover who those people really are that that you can count on when something like that happens. Even if they've never walked through it, the fact that
Mhm.
they know you that well, you trust them, they trust you, and you can share that kind of stuff with them.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about things that maybe weren't helpful. Some people have really good intentions. They'll say, "I'll do anything, just tell me what to do." I don't even know what to tell you. The people that get it just show up with something. Whatever
Yeah.
God puts on your heart, do that.
yeah.
That's what I would tell people. Don't ask, "What can I do for you?" Because they don't even know. When you're deep in grief, you don't even know what to tell them.
And those are good words, Billy. We experience that as well. Talking about how grief affects your physical being, and that means that it affects our brains. And our brains just are not
Yeah.
functioning particularly well. There is such a thing as grief brain.
Yeah.
Billy, what you said is so incredibly accurate. We don't even know what we need or what we want. So,
Mhm.
as you said, if God puts it on your heart, if you see that the grass is tall, in your friend's yard, maybe just take care of it. If you see that there's a pile of dirty clothes in the house, if you're visiting, just take care of that. Maybe wash and dry those clothes for them because they may just not have the capacity to do it that day.
Yeah.
And people wouldn't believe what that means when they just simply step in and do something practical for us.
I had a boss that when we were going through the memorial service and everything, and people were in and out of our house, and we had 2 golden retrievers, and, we still had to care for them, so we knew we were gonna have to put them in the kennel, and my boss said, "Just tell us where you're kenneling them, and we're gonna take care of that for you."
Wow.
I can't tell you how much that meant to me, just for 3 or 4 days to have that taken care of because we didn't have the bandwidth to do anything else, and
Of
taking
course you
care of
didn't.
them was a huge thing,
Mm,
practical
mm.
thing.
That's
Yeah, just
amazing.
meals, people showing up and bringing meals and doing a meal train. There are just so many practical ways that the body of Christ just reached out and blessed us. Just so
I'm
many
s
things.
I'm so glad that that was y'all's experience because it's not for everybody. Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you something. This just kind of popped into my mind, and I'll ask this out of remembering our own journey. Was it challenging to go into places that you went to regularly, routinely, grocery store, drugstore, that sort of thing. Did y'all find it really hard to go back to places like that and just walk inside knowing that you needed some essentials, whether it was, some grocery items or something for dinner or whatever, and you almost can't bring yourself to do it?
Yeah, I mean, that there are things that definitely many grief triggers, as I say, that I might have a memory might pop up if I'm in a particular store. I would just start crying. Most of the time when I went out in public for the first year, you probably saw me crying more than you didn't see me crying. But, I mean, I would still talk to people though, and yeah, our other daughter says, "Mom, you can talk and you can cry and have a conversation with people." But, I
Yeah,
mean, people need to see that we're real. We're not gonna
of
hide our
course.
feelings and
No.
emotions, but yes, any particular place any triggers for you on
I
going
think even
places or
going back to church was really hard
Yeah. Oh,
because
yeah.
Yeah.
I would see people across the parking lot, and there are certain people that just want to enter into a discussion about details that I just didn't have the ability to just go through that again. And I would kind of veer off, and
Mhm.
it's not easy to see people that are acquaintances and maybe not your best friends that are interested, but sometimes it's just good just to say it's good to see you. And sometimes when somebody would ask a question,
Mhm.
we'd say it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could not agree more, and I was kinda chuckling a couple of seconds ago when you were sharing that, Billy, because, that was a very similar experience for us. We were not able to go back to church for, probably a couple of months. Ryan died the last week of October, and I think the first time we went back to church after that was a Christmas Eve service at another church, at a family member's church,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
just couldn't bring ourselves to go back to our church. And it's not because they didn't care or they weren't kind or compassionate. I don't mean that at all. We just couldn't walk through those doors. And when we started going back to church, we would purposefully get there late and leave early so that we didn't have to engage a whole lot.
You don't wanna have to give an excuse. We shouldn't have to.
No, you're
We
right. We
we should
shouldn't.
give ourselves, as we always say, there were several times the first 6 months we said, we looked at each other before we went into a situation, and we'd say, "Let's give ourselves grace. If we're not ready for this, let's leave." And we did that at several parties we were invited to. We just
Yeah, I
couldn't
think
we just we just couldn't handle it.
that's very wise. I mean, you have to know your limits, not what somebody else's expectations are, because people will continue to have expectations of us sometimes that are so unrealistic, and they mean well, of course, because it's new for them too. I mean, chances are the majority of people have never been through what we have, and so they don't really know how to handle it either. So you do have to be kind to yourselves, and you have to set the boundaries for what you can and can't do, regardless of what you think somebody else might think or say. It's just really important to guard yourselves. Sometimes when people lose a child, the grief is so overwhelming, and it can just feel like you're being encompassed about by a cloud. And it feels like that's where you're going to stay. You think other people see you as that couple or that individual who lost a child, and we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to relate to them. We don't know whether to invite them over for dinner. We don't know whether to invite them out to coffee or whatever it is. And I think our focus can become so pointed to our loss. That's all we think about is what we lost. We lost our child. We lost future memories, whatever that is. And there's a very real danger of that grief becoming our identity, and it makes it difficult to move forward. Is that making sense at all?
I think it is for a lot of people. I mean, I think that we really look for ways to grieve well, you know,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
with like those with hope.
And that was where I was going with that. So let's talk about some of the ways that you guys chose, because sometimes we do have to make deliberate choices to do things that we don't just feel like doing. We have to choose to do something different in order to get healthy again. So what did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. The last week when Juliana was discharged from the hospital, she returned home, and Brian and Jessica and Billy and I were all here with her, and it was a real sacred time, and so hospice came in and provided support. And then after she passed, we reached back out to them after her loss and wanted to see if we could maybe even find a good counselor there. So God just, again, we made a choice. We were never ready for anything that we've done since her passing. We just made a choice that we're gonna reach out, and so we went to this I call it Grief 101, but it was just a basic class on grief of all different types of loss. And we did that with our other daughter, Jessica. And that was really special. And we met the counselor. She was a believer. And we were like, God brought her our way. And so we began to go to counseling for about 6 months, didn't we? And that was hugely helpful. It was
Yeah.
helpful to have a place to process, to verbally process our grief and thoughts, feelings, emotional in a safe space.
At times we felt like we were so stuck. And one of the best things she did for us is she said, talk about your week. You got up every day, you went to work, you took care of things in the home, you might have gone to one social thing. You're doing things, you're living life, and she helped because, like you said, sometimes your own mind can get focused so much on the grief that you think you're just not part of the world. But
Yeah.
she really helped us to realize, and we began walking with our golden retrievers every day, which we had to do anyway. Just getting outside and being in the sunshine and walking together. For me, it's like doing two things at once. I'm walking and talking. I'm not just sitting facing my wife and talking, which can be hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just moving, just
Moving.
instead
Yeah.
of because it'd be a whole lot easier just to sit and grieve and not move. So you have to make
Just
those
getting in a routine.
right, those deliberate choices of moving, setting routines again. And man, there's so much wisdom in the choice that you guys made to see a counselor, because other people that are trained to do that can help you see things that you can't see, even about yourselves. And they can pull things out of us that we couldn't do for ourselves and give us a perspective that we don't have. We did that too. And I can agree with you guys that it was so incredibly beneficial, and I would recommend it to anybody who is in that place where the grief is still very intense. There is no shame whatsoever, and it is not a sign of weakness to go and talk with someone.
Greg, we kind of pushed our counselor a little bit because we said, we're not content with just this general approach. Can you introduce us to other parents that have lost children? And so she formed a group with them. And then we said, Kathy, our daughter's really hurting too. Can some of these bring their children, remaining children, and
Adult
talk about
children.
adult children that talk about sibling loss?
Yeah.
Which
I love that.
sometimes goes with unaddressed.
It
So,
does. Yeah, they're actually known as the forgotten mourners. It's logical from so many standpoints because those adult children particularly don't want to add any more of a burden to their parents. And as parents, you're just not even in a place where you think about how this impacts anybody else, because we're the ones who lost a child. And even though those siblings are grieving in a deeper way than we know about. I mean, and I can speak to that too, because our daughter Whitney is almost 10 years older than Ryan, so she was like a second mom to him. But we didn't really know how deeply she was grieving until years later, when we had done a lot of healing and she was able to share more of that. So I get what you guys are saying, and it is important for them to be able to get counseling too, if at all possible.
Yeah, when I returned, it was always really trying to be proactive even when we didn't feel like it. When I returned to
Yeah.
work, I had an acquaintance that gave me a book called The 1-Year Book of Hope by Nancy and David Guthrie.
Oh,
And
right. Yeah.
that was a book that was so meaningful. It was just raw, and they had also experienced child loss. And so through that book, we were both able to find out about the respite retreats that they offered for people. So we, applied to go to one of those, and that was so helpful for us in our grief journey. It was part of our healing journey. I mean, God just really met us there. And so it was so good to be with other parents that get it, in a
Yeah.
retreat setting. And so we were able to connect with a couple that we have really become dear friends of ours.
Oh,
So, yeah.
that's really great. And what you said is so true, Julie, that when you get together with people who have lived through the same trauma and loss as we have, you don't even have to explain anything to them. You automatically know what they're experiencing. You know how hard it is. And you've got this instant connection like you don't have with anybody else. And that really is incredibly helpful.
You're right. It is. It's just so helpful. I mean, even to this day, I think that really kind of helped us almost like get over the hump of being stuck. Did you want to
Yeah,
add to that?
I was just gonna say, for me in the beginning, it was really hard for me to read my Bible, and many times Julie would read it out loud, and we would find these other books by authors that had loss and read those together. We started questioning, what is heaven all about? What is it like? And really reading books on heaven. I don't know that I'd ever thought that much about heaven before, but when you have a loved one go and several loved ones, you really want to know more. And it's not going to be long before we join them there.
I love that. It's so interesting because I've talked to a number of other parents along the way who have said the same thing. And Billy, Kathy, and I were so hungry for information about heaven. I mean, we thought we knew about heaven because, we both were believers and had been since we were children. But you don't, as you said, you don't learn that much in church or just through reading scripture about heaven. And we craved everything we could find out about heaven and read this incredible book by Chip Ingram called The Real Heaven. It's not a real
Mm.
long book. Randy Alcorn wrote one called Heaven. It's much thicker, but man, those resources, you can't find enough of them. And I'm so glad you shared that. Let me ask you this, because I think this is something that is so different for everybody, but I think in general, it's a difficult thing to deal with after we lose a child. If you're still, of working age, it's going back to work and facing all of those people that you worked with every day and facing clients or facing students. And I don't know about y'all, but that was one of the hardest things that I had to think about was going back to work. And I was very blessed. My company allowed me to stay out of work with full pay for a couple of months. What was that like for you guys? What was the hardest part about that?
Well, my job, I was a school social worker, so I did have my own office, which was so helpful. And I started going back after taking maybe about a month off for bereavement. I started going back part-time for a few weeks, and then we had a Easter holiday, and then I went back full-time and for the remainder of the year. So I was given a lot of grace. I remember my principal saying, if you need to, you can go out and take a break out in the car or, just transition however it works for you.
Right.
And it was good for me to get into a routine and all, but at the same time, it was difficult because I remember
Yeah.
walking down the hall one day and one of the uh, staff members said, "Oh, I haven't had a chance to speak to you yet." And they wanted to let me know how they'd been thinking about me and praying for me, and I just burst out into tears. But, it and then they said, "Oh, I didn't mean to get you upset." And I said, "Well, I'm already sad. I'm already
Right.
thinking about our beloved Juliana, and so you didn't make me cry. I was gonna probably cry anyway." you know?
Right. Right. Right.
So
I think one of the challenges and I'm as guilty as anybody, but is to have people know, but then say nothing because you wanna
Yeah.
talk about your
Mhm.
child. You're thinking about him all the time. And I know they don't mean it this way, but as if nothing happened, but, you know, maybe they're so uncomfortable, they don't know where to approach you, but just to be able to have conversation and, ask a question.
I really appreciate you guys sharing that because I think that's something that's so important for people who are looking in from the outside to understand. Is as you guys said, one of our greatest fears as parents who have lost a child is that everybody's going to eventually forget about our child. They'll forget they ever lived. And we crave opportunities to talk about our child. We love to hear other people say their name or to just to, as you said, to ask a question. And I've heard it said that sometimes people do nothing because they're afraid that if they do anything, they're going to remind us that we lost our child. So let's be real clear. We never forget that we lost our child. So you're not reminding us that we did. You're simply reminding us that you remember our child and you remember that we're going through the hardest thing that we've ever faced in our lives and you're
Mhm.
not ignoring us.
Right. Because it's almost like a barrier between you until it is acknowledged.
It is.
And
It
then
absolutely is.
yeah.
Before we go, I do want to talk about something that I think anybody who is a believer will understand this. And if you're not, then maybe this is something that would be beneficial. We know that there's a very well known and a very much loved verse, and it's Romans 8:28, and it talks about how God uses everything in the life of one of his children to bring about good. And that means even things that, from a human perspective only, are so horrible. And when we lose a child, you can't imagine anything good coming out of it. But we know that God can redeem things that were meant for evil for good. He can redeem a death for good. And I think for you guys, I've heard evidences of that in our conversations today, as well as when we talked several months ago. But you guys were able to, out of your grief and out of how God has healed you throughout this journey over the last 8 years, you guys started a ministry. And so I'd like for you just to take a couple of minutes and tell us about that, what that looks like, and who it is that you guys focus on.
Well, speaking of Romans 8:28, that's my life verse.
Is
I mean,
it?
it is, and it's taken on a whole new meaning with experiencing the loss. It's just it has. I mean, we say now that his choice and his way for our timing, for our good and his glory, but that doesn't mean we really understand, but we trust. That's what we say about Romans 8:28.
Yes.
And we know that if Juliana trusted Jesus during her whole 16 to 17 months of treatment, during her pain and suffering, you know what? We can step out in faith and trust Jesus, continue to trust him day to day. We know that he has a purpose and we are seeing that unfold.
Yeah, if we're
Yeah.
still alive, we have a purpose, Greg.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what's the name of the ministry, y'all? I'm trying to remember, but I'm blanking.
Well, yeah, during COVID, we began to hear of so many other parents that had experienced adult child loss that so in 2021, with the encouragement and support of many people, just I can't even begin to tell you everybody. We formed a group, ministry group called Restoring Hope.
Right, right. Yeah.
And
I love
it's
the
for
name.
bereaved parents. Yes, it's for bereaved parents who have experienced adult child loss, and we just wanna come alongside them and let them know they're not alone, provide, biblical hope and education and just a safe space for them to, to share their story
Yeah.
and have
Is
discussion
this
and, just be there.
is this something y'all do in the form of groups where you get together locally in Greensboro, or is it something you guys do online, or both?
That's a great question. It's local. It's actually
Okay.
we use the space at a local church.
Okay. Okay.
We do, yes.
And y'all meet together
And we
weekly or
meet monthly.
monthly? Okay.
We
And
found that some people are, if they're doing other like grief counseling or other things, more than once a month is just too much
yeah.
emotionally to
Yeah.
handle and to process. And so if they're
Yeah.
especially in their grief, or even if they've been bereaved parents for a number of years. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very important to recognize that. It's sometimes, as we talked about earlier, it's about setting guardrails, around our grief. And sometimes once a week can be a bit too much.
too
If
much, yeah.
somebody in the general Greensboro area wanted to get in touch with you guys and talk about the possibility, how would be the best way for them to do that, Julie?
Well, right now we don't have a website yet, but that's something we want to do in the future.
Okay,
But
I gotcha.
they can just reach out to me at my email,
Okay, you want to
which you
do
could put that in the notes. Yes,
okay,
the email Julie R Melton MELTON at gmail.com.
okay. Yep, I'll be glad to include that in your episode summary. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming and being our guest today and sharing your story and introducing us to Juliana and just giving us glimpses into your grief journey and your healing journey. I think it's so important for people who are in different stages, or I shouldn't say stages because I don't really believe that, but in different seasons of grief, to hear how somebody else who's 8 years into the process is doing today versus what it was like in that early season where it's so deep and acute and traumatic. And to see that there is hope. There is life again, and you can even find joy again. And of course, we believe that hope is a person, it's Jesus Christ. And we believe
Amen.
that the joy and the meaning and purpose in our lives comes from him in that relationship we have with him. And I am just so thankful to see how well you guys are doing today. I love that you're reaching out to other people who are grieving as well and trying to help them. And, I hope that your ministry continues to grow and unfold, and that at some point in the future, you'll have a website, and maybe who knows what God wants to do with it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. We know that, this is not the end, and that we will see our Juliana again, and we'll see Jesus face to face. And we're really looking forward to that day when we're all reunited again. So,
Amen.
amen
Completely
is right.
understand that. And my wife and I look forward to that day as well. Sometimes it just can't come soon enough.
Soon enough. That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
But in the meanwhile, we know that, again, God has a purpose and a plan for each person walking through grief. And I would say, just look for ways to serve, and he will open doors for them. And
he will. He absolutely will. And he'll use that in your healing process as well.
Serving has definitely been a part of our healing and our journey.
And God's opened the doors for us to be, with several different organizations. Our Hearts Are Home, and While We're Waiting to be part of those groups too. So
yeah, those are great organizations, great ministries. I love both. I know the folks. I know Gary and Laura and Jill and Brad. Those are incredible and very godly people. And so
they're just amazing.
They really are. So guys, thank you for sharing your hearts today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being my guest. I have loved the conversation that we've had today and look forward to hearing more good things from you guys.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this episode encouraging and helpful. If you did, would you mind taking just 1 minute to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts by clicking the link provided in each episode description, and then sharing with someone you know? And as always, thank you for listening.